Hi, guys. Welcome back to Wynter Tai Chats. And on this episode, we're speaking with a practitioner of several martial arts, such as Chinese Kempo, Tang Soo Do, Wing Chun, and even Sui Jiao, just to name a few. But it is his practice of Chen family Tai Chi Chuan that has captured my attention. He is also a very accomplished author with works published by YMAA Publications and Earnshaw Books. With over 44 years in the art, he has truly experienced all the benefits to be had from its constant practice. Please welcome Monk Yun Rou. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for the invitation and the pleasure of being with you.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come on, sir. So I know you're a very busy person, so let's go ahead and get straight into the interview. So I'll ask you this. How did you start the martial arts, sir?
The New York City in which I grew up was a bit of a rough place. There were still dinosaurs, roaming the streets. So it was dangerous to go out. And I was often put upon by a variety of different street gangs in the city when I was a little boy, and they would steal my books and all that. And when I came across Bruce Lee movies and started to fantasize about how wonderful it would be to be able to put it into the proceedings on my own instead of running away, I liked that idea. And then when I saw David Carradine's admittedly questionable martial arts, but wonderful portrayal of the equanimity of a monk in the TV show Kung Fu, I really had my imagination captured. And as I have written in my memoir, The Monk of Park Avenue, I felt like I needed to find some of those great Shaolin masters. It turned out they weren't Shaolin masters, but they were masters, and get a better fix on life and how to conduct myself in this world. And I was not getting that from religion, and I was not getting that from school or from my parents. So I began questing early to figure out what is underneath the surface of the pond. I was very curious to know what is really going on in our lives, the meaning of it, what and who we really are, and finding teachings that I could relate to that made sense to me. And my late mother was a philosophy major, and when I was a little boy, I found all kinds of Chinese books in her library. I began reading them. And although I could not understand things like the Tao Te Ching at all, back then, of course, most people can't understand them when they're adults. So I sure didn't get it when I was 12. But I felt that there was something there for me anyway. And I was drawn in that direction. And then when I wound up incarcerated in South America for defending an innocent woman on the street against a drunken policeman late at night, and I had quite a number of experiences there, which are in deference to your audience, I won't graphically repeat them, but they were bad, and I kind of made a deal with whatever God I thought there might be, that if I got out of that circumstance alive, I would devote myself to taking care of myself and others in this way. That's the shortest answer I got.
All right, no problem. So, due to those circumstances of how you started martial arts, I do have to ask. So, what style was the first one?
I was living in Santa Barbara, California, and there was a young Korean guy who opened a Tang Soo Do school. I think they call it Subakdo or something else now to take the Chinese reference out of that. But at that time, that's what they called it. And I went in with tight hips, poor coordination, not a very gifted athlete to say the least, and not very flexible, and with legs that are about the size of chopsticks on a tall torso. So Korean kicking arts were definitely the wrong choice for me, but I didn't know anything about all that. And I tried my best. I bumbled through, but I was pretty poor at it. And at one point, that master uh, put his hands on my shoulders as I was sitting down doing a clam stretch, and he stepped up on the inside of my knees and bounced, and he ripped my groin open. And I I don't recall any explanation of why he was doing that, or the fact that in order to maintain flexibility from that injury, you had to keep on stretching. So, I just went home with my tail between my legs and waited for weeks until it was too late. Scar tissue had formed, and then I went back to school and I was, you know, more inflexible than before. Uh, so that style of teaching didn't work so well for me, and nor was that art well suited to me much as I respect it now. So I went from there to Ed Parker's Kempo, so a traditional Kempo system, and I had a wonderful teacher in that, and he and I are still great friends. I saw him recently in California. We did a little Tai Chi sword together, and I stayed with that for a while.
Okay. So you went from Tang Sudo to Chinese Kempo. Oh, I remember. Okay, that's very good. That's very good. So Wing Chun came in much later, or a lot,
Well,
pretty soon.
there's a litany of things and different arts that I practiced before I found Chen Tai Chi, and I fear that they make me sound like a jack of all trades and a master of none. But I suppose that's fair because I was questing, I was searching, and I didn't settle down and focus as I have for just about the last 30 years on only Chen Tai Chi until I found what I was looking for. So,
Mm-hmm. So, if you don't mind me asking, so you found Chen Taiji after or before that little stint you said, the incarceration in South America for defending that?
yeah, well, it was many, many years later. Uh,
Many years. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Who was your teacher? Who is your teacher? Sorry.
So my primary master is Yen Gaofei, sometimes
Yes.
goes by Master Max Yen. He's in South Florida most of the time now, but I've been with him in China and in South Florida, and he is a huge influence on my life and someone very near and dear to me, next to my immediate family. Maybe you could say the most important person in the world to me.
Awesome, awesome. So, how did you meet him?
Well, if you have time on this podcast for a humiliating story, most of my stories, most of my stories are humiliating, I'm afraid, um, but they provide good fodder and a good laugh. Uh, I was teaching so-called internal Chinese arts, a fitness club in South Florida when I moved there years ago, and the guy came into the class and he handed me a piece of paper, and he said, "This is the phone number for a guy that I just heard about, and he's here from China, and I think you'd like to meet him. Apparently, he's really good." So I forgot about that exchange, and I encountered this little wrinkled up piece of paper in my trousers after it came out of the wash some weeks later, and I managed to decipher the number, and I called my now master, and he was a young Chinese guy, and I had no idea that I was talking to what I would say is like a Leonardo da Vinci of Tai Chi. I didn't realize who he was, who his family was, what his background was. He was just some guy. I got his name, on a piece of paper. I called him, and he agreed to have breakfast, and I went to the breakfast um, in Hollywood, Florida, sitting against the glass of a coffee shop, looking outside and talking to him, and spent the time blowing my own horn. And I won this and I won that, and I have this black belt and that black belt, and on and on. And he just quietly listened to me and ate his omelet and nodded and smiled. And when we got done with breakfast, he said, "You want to move around a little bit?" And we stepped outside, and right then a huge deluge, one of those South Florida rainstorms, began. We were just under the awning, the eave of the coffee shop. And he said, "Like right here?" I said, "Okay." I put up my hand and we touched. And I was sitting down on the asphalt. I don't remember that he did anything. I touched him and I was on my butt. I leapt up and I said something excruciating like, rain, slippery streets. And he smiled. He smiled and he said, "Again?" Man, we touched again. And down I went, right on my tailbone. And again, I can't tell you that well, now I understand what he did, but at the time I had no idea what was going on. I leapt up again and I said, "It's his shoes, they're not good in the rain. They're very smooth on the bottom, slippery." He said, "Oh, shoes, again?" And, the third time I went down, I realized, that it wasn't the shoes and it wasn't the street. It wasn't the rain. And I said to him, "Listen, all those things I said about how great I was, forget that." It's just forget that stuff. Do me, whatever I got to learn that. He looked at me. He said, "Oh, you're so famous, and I'm busy." And he walked away into the rain. And he left me standing there. And I loathed myself so keenly at that moment. And I got my little pickup truck and I drove back to my house 45 minutes away. The whole time I was hating on myself. What an idiot. And I was banging on the steering wheel and I was afraid I was going to set off the airbag. I didn't realize that the sensors are not in the airbag and not in the steering wheel, but I kept hitting myself anyway. And I thought, I had to run my mouth. And I think this is the guy that I've been looking for all these years. I somehow sense that this is that person. And I just screwed it up. And I resolved to fix it. So the next morning, that evening, I found out his address from the same guy who gave me the phone number. And the next morning I went and sat outside his house with a lunch bucket and a thermos with some lemonade. My wife said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I have something I got to do." And I got to his house at 6:30 in the morning and I sat outside his apartment building and waited for him to come out. When he came out, he saw me sitting on the curb and he said, "You!" And he walked by me, got in his car and drove away. To make this shorter, I did that same thing, rain or shine, for 3 weeks. Every day I sat outside on the stoop outside his house, one day shy of 3 weeks. At one point he came out and said, "You're stalking me. I'm going to call the police. Get out of here." And I just waited for him to come back. He would walk right by me. And at one point he said, "You're very persistent." And I said something on the order of, "I'm sick and you're the doctor. I need to know, what do you know?" And I sensed, some greatness in him, and I didn't know enough to know what I was sensing. But I knew enough to know that I had to pursue it. So eventually, he took pity on me and he told me to meet him in the park and said, "Don't be late." And I was there, 2 hours early. And he put me in a Wuji standing meditation position. I'd never done anything like that. He said, 1 hour, don't move. And he went to the picnic table and drank his tea and read a Chinese language newspaper in South Florida. And eventually, and I remember thinking, I'm going to pass out. Like my neck is in spasm, my carotid is being squeezed. I'm going to pass out. but I'll be damned if I'm going to stop. So I just went through that pain and grit my teeth. And when I was finished, he said, same time on Thursday. And I came back and we did it again. And, I did that for a month or so and I got better at standing. And he read his newspaper and drank his tea. And I went home and kept doing that. And eventually he began to teach me. Very
That's
traditional
awesome.
story. And in some way, it's a very traditional story, like sitting outside the gates of Shaolin or whatever.
True. I mean, it is a kind of a traditional story, but when you really think about it, though, I mean, there is a lot of reason behind it. They want to see if there is. They want to see your persistence. It's funny you said that, right? They want to see that you have that persistence to be able to carry on even through the training if they even go so far as to start teaching you. Oh, that's awesome.
Well, looking at me, um, he must have ascertained quickly, because he's very insightful this way, that it was not going to be on my native athletic gifts that I would accomplish anything, and that it would probably be through dumb persistence, um, maybe even smart persistence, but persistence. So I would say you're probably spot on with that observation.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And this is your teacher in Chen Family Tai Chi.
Yes, and he is he doesn't love us to talk too much about him, but he is a very blessed person in terms of his abilities and his genius, but also in terms of his family background. He comes from a very august old Chinese family that existed before there was a China. So he really, ancestry is very important in the culture, and you know he has all that. And the number of the people who taught him were just the greatest living masters. And I want to say he was fortunate, I guess you could say that, but he deserved it and he worked hard. And unlike me, I was fortunate and I worked hard, but I don't know that I deserved it. but I got it anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so, speaking about it's funny that you just said that. I remember just before we started the interview, we were speaking, and I remember you saying that you were interviewed by a magazine one time, and you were actually you were reading over the proof, right? And you had asked them to change the letter from A to I because you didn't want to be referred to as master. Um, you said you went to your teacher, and your teacher said, "Hey, you are a master." Is this the same? Is this the same teacher who said yes?
That's the same teacher. I continue to question many years later whether I deserve that title, but I'm just so aware of so many things I have to do better, um, and I'm not where I want to be with those things. But it may be that that's more about my misunderstanding, not of my own limitations, but just of what makes a master. Maybe that definition is a little clearer to me now than it was all those years ago. Um, but it has to do with commitment and dedication as much as anything. Um, and so, what I can take credit for is not transcendent skill or poignant understanding as much as having recognized how important this art and this wisdom was to me at that time, and having stayed on that bus all these years. And now I know that you know some bit about my background, but I've fallen prey to a terrible disease. So I have uh, lost a great deal of the prowess that I had 4 or 5 years ago. It's a fatal disease of the brain. In any case, I continue to train and to teach a little bit here and there. Uh, but regarding myself as a master in diminished condition is even harder than before. Yeah.
Mm, understandable. Well, it's funny. The not really funny, but the point that we were making before is, um, your teacher said that you are a master, and by right, if your teacher says that you're a master, then you are considered and can be called master. Correct?
So, his point to me was that in the tradition, when you're a master teacher, and this required that I consider him a master, which is way, way, way beyond any doubt. I mean, I think he's one of the finest players in the world. Um, Number one, I would do what he said, even if I didn't agree with it or didn't understand it, and I have plenty of examples of that. Um, and then I would later come to understand things that I didn't, when I had misgivings, and it was with some discomfort. I guess I'm not so uncomfortable with that title now. I have other titles and all. I don't think about them really, but at the time, that was one example of me accepting that someone in whose hands I have put my life, my training, my education, my knowledge, my growth. Um, I, I accepted what he said. That's the bottom line. And
That's good.
my opinion about it wasn't so relevant, really. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. As long as your teacher considers you a master, and that's the one who's giving you the education. Well, by right, you are called. You will be a master if he calls you that. And since that is so, right, I have full confidence in asking you this question, right? As being a master of Chen, Tai Chi Chuan, I have to ask you this. What is Chen style Tai Chi Chuan?
Well, we could start with what it's not, because I'm not familiar with your audience, and I know that people who listen to um, anything about Tai Chi these days, uh, they may be subject to the misconceptions that are widely spread in this country, maybe in the West in general, about the art. So American people may go to Asia, they may go to even to China, not so much right now, but they may have traveled in Asia and seen elderly people in the park uh, doing qigong sets, or they may not have even been seeing Tai Chi, but they would know if it was Baji or some other art. Um, Maybe just not martial qigong, but they thought anything where people are outside moving slowly and they're older is Tai Chi. I think that is both a wonderful and a damaging preconception about the art. The wonderful is that they find it elegant or beautiful or interesting, and seeing people do it in their travels or in the parks locally here in the States, maybe they have their interest piqued, and um, that's positive. It brings people to the art. Negative is that there is a total and complete lack of understanding that this art, that in the authentic version, in the original version of this art, was born of the battlefield. And it was born at a time when farmers, well, peasants, I suppose, in a hierarchical, dynastic, imperial society, they were the bottom. Imperial conscriptors would ride into the village on fancy horses with weapons and just point out every man between 15 and 50 and say, "You're going with me to war. You're going to fight for a guy you've never met. You don't even really know if he exists. He's a quasi-mythical figure, the emperor. You're going to fight against an enemy you've never heard of for reasons you don't understand or care about, frankly. And you're going to die doing that. And so we're going to give you a little bit of training. You're a big, strong guy. We're going to put a guanggung dao and your halberd in your hand. You're a tall guy. We're going to give you an 8 or 9 foot spear. You're a farmer who's used to cutting grain, so we're going to give you a dao. Maybe we'll give you shuang dao, 2 of those, if you have a gift for it. And then we're going to take you off to die in the battlefield. You won't see your family again. That was the setting. And this art, developed by a particular family, there's all kinds of legends about the development of Tai Chi and imaginary monks and various things that people like to do that to tell stories, which is fine. I like to tell stories too. I'm the author of 26 books. But we have to be able to distinguish between reality and fantasy, which, unfortunately, let's say many people are not able to do that. That's a problem that pervades all kinds of fundamentalism and various other things. Not our topic today. But in any case, if you received training in your family style that arose from the village that you lived in, and you managed to come back from battle, whereas the people who lived in adjacent villages didn't get to come back because your art was better and it saved your life, well then, we have something to talk about. And today, remember that Chen Tai Chi was entirely a weapons system for the battlefield. Nobody would go willingly, happily, to war without a weapon. Just say that you've got very sexy, open hand stuff you can do. And what that really was about is when you were unhorsed, or when your weapons were taken away, you were able still to defend yourself to an extent against guys in armor, where your kicks and punches wouldn't help you much. Sometimes it was chainmail. But their joints still worked the same way. And you could attack them in ways that worked even if you were weaponless and they had a weapon. Even if they were protected in a way that you were not, then you might survive. So these Chen style Tai Chi came from the Guanggung Dao, Guan Dao, a halberd. Some people have seen it only in the Kung Fu flicks and period pieces and all that. Guys run along, dragging the blade behind them on the ground, making sparks. Very nice for the movies. The last thing you would do with your prized weapon that your life depended on if you were a soldier. But in any case, that weapon gave birth to Tai Chi. And Tai Chi was built on a tripod of traditional martial arts of the day, the techniques that worked, and also on Chinese medicine, because if you were able to heal people, you probably had a pretty good idea of how the body worked. And then also on Taoist philosophy. And those 3 legs, and the tripod of traditional Tai Chi of whatever stripe. And then, circumstances changed, and we got rifles, and we got guns, and smart bombs, and every granny has a Glock in her glove box in Florida. On and on. The relevance of all this, diminished. But what didn't diminish is the fact that the things that made those martial techniques effective martially also made them good for your health. So, very much worth practicing today.
Awesome. So, seeing as how I've read a little bit on Chen style Tai Chi, and it's very nice to actually hear confirmation, because the way how I see Chen Tai Chi, well, I can only imagine that what we see on YouTube, on social media and videos of what Chen Tai Chi looks like today is definitely not what it looked like back hundreds of years ago, as you're saying that this art was formed out of using weapon. They actually the guandao to be more specific. So that's as you're saying that, I'm visually seeing it, and I'm like, wow, I never knew that. So thank you for that. That's a perspective on Tai Chi that I did not understand, that I didn't even know about it being based off of the halberd. So let's go ahead and take it into the other part of the second question, Monk. Um, Seeing as how you had just stated that it was born on the battlefield, is Tai Chi effective for self-defense?
The stresses and opponents of the day, when halberd work, double broadsword, curved sword, Dao work, Shuang Dao, whether those specific techniques of a sword or a halberd or a spear, my favorite thing to practice these days, are effective for self-defense on the street in Miami in 2025, for example. I think it would be foolish to argue that if your purpose is to avoid being shot in a drive-by or held up on the street by a guy with a Glock, I would not recommend Chen Tai Chi to you. I would recommend studying pistol craft, going to Thunder Ranch or one of those places, learning how to shoot and get your permit and carry a gun. If your lifestyle is such that you're in mortal fear of violence on the street every day, Chen Tai Chi is not going to save you from those guys. If you can't touch somebody, despite all the magical demonstrations on YouTube, drop down. But if you can't touch somebody, it's hard to make Tai Chi work. And if you're not using one of the weapons for which these techniques were developed, then it's kind of you're a little bit of a fish out of water. All of that is not to say that the creation of a body that has great root and connection is not martially worthwhile. And it's especially not to say that the real and more likely opponents and stresses that we face today, things like the degenerative diseases of aging, the consequences of environmental devastation, poisons and toxins, the sedentary lifestyle sitting in front of a computer all day. It's not to say that those things aren't real and important adversaries and situations in which Chen Tai Chi and its daily practice can be useful in keeping you alive. And I mentioned earlier that I have some serious health problem, which is well known on the web now because I've gone public with it some years ago. But I have remained alive with a disease that nobody survives. Nobody survives. Everybody dies. 100% fatal. And I've been given some experimental medicine, which I think is helping. There's no proof that it works, but we think it might. And I take it. And I'm grateful to have it. But I also think that so many years of hours and hours and hours and hours of daily training for decades has also changed my body and my mind to be able to deal with such a ferocious onslaught of such a terrible condition and remain alive. So I have a very nitty-gritty perspective on the value of this art, because without it I would be dead.
Very nice. Very true. Very true. Understandable. So you would have a nitty-gritty outlook on the art.
I do.
Definitely. Well, sir, you definitely answered that question, and I like how you answered it. It depends on what you're looking for, right? If you're looking to defend yourself against gangbangers, Ten style Taiji is not going to help you, right? I understand and I appreciate the authenticity as well as your honesty on that answer right there, Monk. So it's going to take us, into our third question right now. Kung Fu. It is a term that literally means skill. And that skill is acquired usually over a long period of time. So, Monk, in your honest opinion, what do you believe is the hardest part of developing Kung Fu?
So I will answer this, but I also would like to put an asterisk on the last subject, which is not to say that gaining mastery in Chen Tai Chi wouldn't help you against quote-unquote gangbangers. What I meant and what I said was that if you are weaponless against a group of guys with weapons, it's very hard to make a strong argument that any open hand thing is so helpful, and I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend, as I said, getting some weapons training. But there is another way in which training in Chen Tai Chi, in addition to making you much stronger and healthier, can help you in a circumstance like you described, is that there's a certain mindset, an energy, a presence, a calm, which can alter and affect the outcome of confrontations. And yes, there are also physical dimensions and spirals and things which are wonderful and effective, perhaps not against a bullet, but in a lot of other circumstances. So I wouldn't throw out Chen Tai Chi as not being streetable. I would just say that isn't maybe the strongest reason to do it. As far as your Kung Fu question, there are always the same two issues regarding gaining skill and staying with things. And those have been true throughout culture and human history. One is the internal environment. Who are you? What kind of person are you? How much patience and perseverance do you have? And if you don't have a lot, can you work on that so you could get more? And are you interested in doing that, willing to do it? The other is the external situation. We live in a speed and greed world, absent any real culture in this country. I call it the American anti-culture. People don't like me when I say that, but that's the way I see it. And this country is a marketplace primarily, and not so much a culture. And Tai Chi came from a definite culture. The fact that, it takes a long time to learn it, it's not a minus, at least not in the original setting. The fact that it takes discipline and hard work and stick-with-itness, that's an unpopular set of words in a give it to me now, I can buy anything or anybody if I have enough dough. culture that we live in. And so there is, for all Kung Fu style, but also in particular for Tai Chi, there's a conflict, there's an incongruence between what the outer world and culture is deluging us with in terms of messaging, priorities, values, and what is required to eschew much of that in favor of personal cultivation and development. If one is to take Kung Fu very seriously, Kung Fu hard work, cool, bitter, the taste of practice, it hurts. It makes you sore. It makes you grouchy sometimes. Sometimes it can also make you feel great. But it has its moments. Working hard on things that are difficult to do physically and mentally, that has a cost. You have to be willing to bear that cost. And the only real reason, BS reasons aside, but the only real reason to do that is if you really believe and discover that your life is better with it than without it. I can say that in my decrepitude now, it takes more drive and discipline than it ever has in all the years I've been doing this to do it, because everything is incredibly difficult and nothing feels good. I hurt all the time. I'm sick. So to make myself get up and do anything instead of just turning on the TV and lying there drooling all day is and can be a challenge, honestly. So the only real reason that motivates any of us to do things that are difficult for us to do, or that we may or may not feel good all the time, especially when we push it, is that we recognize that as it is in any other relationship, you only want to be with this art, or with this person, or with this job, or calling, or field, if your life is better with it than without it. If you can't honestly say that, don't do it. Find something that does that for you and do that. And I don't care if it's air hockey or crayons. Doesn't matter.
It's like a calling. If you don't feel a calling, don't do it.
Do it. So simple. Don't torture yourself. Many wonderful things to do in the world, and much that needs help. Many situations that need our effort and our caring and our passion and compassion. Many people that need our help. Many situations that need to be addressed. This is a hard one, and it doesn't reward financially the way a lot of other things that one could do reward. You have to look for different kinds of rewards, and you have to be that kind of person who wants those other kinds of rewards. And if you're not, by no means allow yourself to get sucked into, I want to be John Wick or Bruce Lee or some nonsense like that. That's childish. You can enjoy those things for entertainment like many millions of people do without devoting your life to it. And of course, what you see on screen, big and little, and on YouTube, is not real. It's something on YouTube. It's something on television. It's something in a movie. Real is, what effect has this had on your life? What can you actually point to and say, look, I understand this because of what I've been through with and without. So I wouldn't dream of stopping. Even when I'm too exhausted to get out of bed, I still do something. because to not do it is worse.
I like that frame of thought. I like that. And I like that this specific wording, because to not do it is worse. It's true. That is very true. Thank you very much, Monk, for that answer. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next question, right? Which is, in my opinion, a very lofty one. Why? Because this has to do with your training and your life. Meaning, how has your martial training affected your personal life? How has it influenced, rather I say, your professional or your personal life?
Well, in the things that we have already discussed, some of that has come up. I can try to flesh it out a little bit with some specifics. I'm an old man now, so I was a little schoolboy before we had definitions of neurodiversity or different kinds of learning, different ways of learning, the differences between people and how they learn. Nobody knew any about that stuff when I was a kid. You'd force yourself where you wouldn't. I managed, to force myself to do academic things that got me, where I was supposed to be, I suppose. But I never enjoyed any of it really, and I never was very good at it. As I say that, I think that some of my childhood teachers would argue with that. Say, no, I remember him being enthusiastic about some things and learning other things very well. And I allow that. Okay, I don't want to paint it all as darkness. But we only relatively recently have a system of education that caters to, that supports people who learn differently, who understand the world differently, who process differently. And I think martial arts, for the right person, and certainly for me, gave and continue to give a framework in which I can flourish and process things in the world, and mostly learn the concept of regaining and maintaining my Wu Ji, my happy place, my personal equilibrium, not going batshit crazy when stuff happens, not losing my temper, not running out of the ability to contend with things out of impatience with my own limitations. That happens to me still sometimes, but I get it back pretty quickly. And my teacher refers to his Tai Chi school as return to Wu Ji. Wu Ji, in this case, being equilibrium. This is a term that comes from Chinese cosmogony, which is another subject, but how the world came to be. But what we want to be is what some Taoists refer to as Pu, the uncarved block, the undifferentiated person who is neutral and not swayed by sudden passions, anger, fatality, fatalism, I guess I should say, not fatality. And everybody is swayed by fatality. Unswayed by fatalism or negative thinking. Negative trends and patterns and habits can be clearly seen in these practices, and how we respond to the world can be seen. And we learn that the only thing we can control in this world, and even that not always, is ourselves. If we can't control ourselves, nothing else is going to work. And so, if there's one reason to study these arts, and I set aside a very strong argument that physical practices in Yin Tai Chi based on three-dimensionality and spirals have very concrete and specific benefits for the health of your body. Moving liquid through a solid matrix, like wringing out a towel, moving your blood and your lymph, your interstitial fluid, your chi through your body is very effectively accomplished by these methods. But maybe most effectively out of any techniques there are, because there are certain physical realities to the world we live in and the way we are constructed. But I think also that the mental side of this, which is a corollary, we build a strong body in order to build a strong mind. We don't believe that one can build a strong mind without having a healthy and strong body, even if, as has happened to me, the healthy, strong body eventually gives up, is defeated by age and disease and so on. But with any luck, until we lose our marbles, until and unless we lose our marbles, we can retain that kind of strength. And that is born of the fire, born of the crucible of these training methods. And Yin Tai Chi is just the one I know best, but I would never represent that it's the best or the only. I might think so, but I don't know. There are other really great things to do and great arts. What I would say is that I understand that how this one works and why. It has worked for me to keep me alive. I like to share it with people who really want to learn it. And even in my diminished capacity now, I still managed to get some ideas across. So it's all good.
Yes, sir. It definitely is. Definitely is. As you say, even through your circumstances right now, your health circumstances right now, your training, it's what's kept you going till now. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely awesome. So the next one I have for you then, Monk. If you could teach the new generation of martial artists only one thing, it could be technique or philosophy, what would it be?
Flush your phone and pick up your sword.
Drop your phone and pick up your sword. That's great. That's great. All right. Well, do you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
Well, I will, but I don't know if I need to. But we are victims of a very powerful addiction in our culture. The digital world is a tool of control. And it's not in our best interest to be so obsessed and compelled by our devices that we can't remember who we are and where we're going, because we walk into poles or drive into other people and the inability to return to a theta or a delta state of mind, a calm, clear state of mind where you can actually see what's going on in the real world. That inability is very costly. The antidotes to it are really to stop using those devices, to spend much more time in nature, to do your best to become aware of the fact that we are part of a much larger fabric that includes all living things and particularly other sentient beings, and that we are not alone and disconnected in a way that requires an electronic device to reconnect us. That was not the inevitable trajectory of our evolution. Simply to use these tools to kill each other faster and better, to distract each other more powerfully from what really is until we really lose touch with what the hell is going on, what's really happening in the world. A monk friend of mine, a late friend, much missed, used to talk to me about the fact that the very first step in any spiritual practice or pursuit is the awareness, just sitting there. Whether you're bobbing in a dinghy offshore at night under the moon and the stars and hearing fish break water and the lapping of waves, whether you're sitting in an office building somewhere in a cubicle, whether you're in the forest, to be able to notice that something is going on. Just that. Something's going on. It's an astonishingly profound thing, what I just said. Not because I'm such a profound fellow, but because it is an astonishingly profound thing. To recognize something is going on. What's going on? Who am I? What am I? What is happening? Okay, I may not understand what is exactly happening, but at least I can notice that something is, which is something you cannot notice when you are with your phone in front of your face 16 hours a day, even when you eat, even when you use the toilet. So your question to me was, what's one thing I can do? And that is to start to notice, to watch yourself, to not be distracted all the time. Entertainment is nice. Thousands of years ago in China, warriors were distracted. There were games and sports and houses of ill repute. There were plenty of ways to entertain people back then. Hobbies, arts, passions. But to be undistracted and as close to undistractable as we can. Those qualities can be the fruits of arts well studied and practiced. And I can't right now offhand think, especially in the circumstances in which we find ourselves in the world today, of anything more important. Why would we devote ourselves to killing each other and destroying the planet on which we live, which nurtures and provides for us? It's an insane, malicious trajectory. And anything that makes us more aware and more in touch with what's really going on, including using these arts as a tool for that goal, is quintessentially important.
I have to agree with you 100% on that, Monk. Right? Because I've said this time and time again to a number of my guests that we live in a time where it is where the short attention span is almost like a epidemic nowadays. You talk to somebody, they cannot concentrate on one thing. So what you're talking about, being undistractable, that is a whole lot harder. It's a lot harder than it is to say, right? Because lots of people, they're too distracted. So it's a much harder endeavor than one would think. Right? So I do agree with you 100%. So brings us into our last question, Monk. And it's obviously the hardest one. Well, at least for me, it's the hardest one at all times. How can you be contacted?
Oh, now you're just being cruel. So funny. Well, I didn't find you hard to contact at all, and not the other way around. It's been a great pleasure. The the easiest way to get me is just to go online and look for monkyunrou.com, MONKYUNROU.com. It's a little website I have, which gives you the opportunity to join a list. It's free. And if you join the list, then every week you'll hear from me about what my doings might be in my classes and all that. But the website also links to my books, which these days I guess are my most important and effective way of helping people, especially those who I can't meet in person or have the pleasure of teaching or learning from. Um, so I'm also available on email at yunrou@icloud.com. I do a lot by email communications. Um, so those are easy ways.
Awesome, awesome. All contact information for Monk Yun Rou will be in the description down below, as well as all links for his websites. Also in that description is a link for Feiyue shoes. If you need a link for Feiyue shoes, go ahead, click the link down below, get the best prices, best links, all for Feiyue shoes. Contact information for Monk Yun Rou will be in the description down below. Also in the description down below, all those links for Feiyue shoes, if that's what you need. Feiyue shoes, get the best prices, get the best deals, all at Feiyue shoes. Monk Yun Rou, thank you very much for the time that you have taken to speak with me about your journey, about Chen family, Taiji Chuan. Thank you very much. It has been fun. It has been real. I have learned so much from you.
And I from you. Thank you very much.